Good afternoon everyone, I'm Robert from El Magnifico Games, and today we are going to continue with our normal Wednesday poetry, prose and riddles stream. Last week we finished on the poem The Maid's Lament by Walter Savage Landor. Walter Savage Landor was this gentleman. An English writer, poet and activist, his best-known works were the prose Imaginary Conversations and the poem Rose Aylmer, but the critical acclaim he received from contemporary poets and reviewers was not matched by public popularity. As remarkable as his work was, it was equalled by his rumbustious character and lively temperament. Both his writing and political activism, such as his support for La Hose Kossuth and Giuseppe Garibaldi, were imbued with his passion for liberal and republican causes. He befriended and influenced the next generation of literary reformers such as Charles Dickens and Robert Browning. Of particular note is the fact that apparently there were infidelities both on his part and his wife's part, at least as I recall from reading this Wikipedia article last week, and that they spent a long time separated. So that's who he was. We are of course concerned with his poetry. So I will begin this stream, as we normally do, by rereading the last poem we looked at last week, and then we will move on to new poems that we haven't looked at before in rather more detail. So, The Maid's Lament. I loved him not, and yet now he is gone. I feel I am alone. I checked him while he spoke, yet could he speak? Alas, I would not check. For reasons not to love him once I sought, and wearied all my thought. To vex myself in him, I would now... my apologies. To vex myself and him, I now would give my love, could he but live, who lately lived for me, and when he found 'twas vain, in holy ground, he hid his face amid the shades of death. I waste for him my breath, who wasted his for me, but mine returns, and this lorn bosom burns with stifling heat, heaving it up in sleep, and waking me to weep. Tears that had melted his soft heart for years, wept he as bitter tears. Merciful God, such was his latest prayer, these may she never share. Quieter is his breath, his breast more cold than daisies in the mould, where children spell athwart the churchyard gate his name and life's brief date. Pray for him, gentle souls, wherever you be, and oh, pray too for me. Jenny says, I love him not. Forgive my English, it sounds like the writer did not love him rather than the right loved him. I'm not sure I follow you there, Jenny. Could you elaborate? Quite a lovely poem in its way, and with a somewhat unusual subject matter. I'm afraid I still don't follow you, Jenny. We'll begin looking at the next poet in this anthology, but by all means, I don't know the sentence structure. I love him not. That's just saying I do not love him. Jenny says, in short, did the writer love him or not? The whole subject matter of the poem is that this person asserts that they did not love this person while they were alive, but now seems to be suffering from a broken heart now that they've passed on. So, in a sense, the subject of the poem itself is asking themselves whether they loved them, or perhaps more to the point, realizes that they loved them too late. At least that's how I'd interpret it. By all means, you may interpret it otherwise. Interesting, I thought poets only write poems to the ones they love. This is pretty new to me. Well, I mean, we've read plenty of poems dealing with other topics such as death and the seasons and various other things, but yes, I do think it's interesting. So, the next poem is entitled To Lucasta Going to the Wars, and it is by Richard Lovelace. Homophone of Lovelace. Okay, Richard Lovelace was an English poet in the 17th century. He was a cavalier poet who fought on behalf of the king during the Civil War. His best-known works are To Althea from Prison and To Lucasta Going to the Wars. So let's have a quick look through the major events in his life, and then we will move on to the poem itself. Richard Lovelace was born on the 9th of December 1617. His exact birthplace is unknown, and may have been Woolwich, Kent or Holland. He was the eldest son of Sir William Lovelace and Anne Barn Lovelace. He had 4 brothers and 3 sisters. His father was from a distinguished military and legal family. The Lovelace family owned a considerable amount of property in Kent. His father, Sir William Lovelace, was a member of the Virginia Company and an incorporator in the Second Virginia Company in 1609. He was a soldier and died during the war with Spain and the Dutch Republic in the siege of Granello. A few days before the town fell, Richard was 9 years old when his father died. Lovelace's father was the son of Sir William Lovelace and Elizabeth Archer, who was the daughter of Mabel Roffs and Edward Archer, who inherited, under his father's will, the manors of Bishopsbourne and Hawksbourne. Elizabeth's nephew was Sir Anthony Archer, an English politician and cavalier during the English Civil War. He was a son of her brother Sir Anthony Archer and his wife Hester Collett. Lovelace's mother, Anne Barn, was a daughter... Okay, it is difficult because I don't want to just read these articles from top to bottom, but it can be very informative to learn about the major events in their lives, the poets' lives. So we'll skip ahead a bit. In 1629, when Lovelace was 11, he went to Sutton's Foundation at Charterhouse School, then to London. There is no clear record that Lovelace actually attended. It is believed that he studied as a boarder because he did not need financial assistance like the scholars. Interesting. I'm not quite sure what the significance of that is. He spent 5 years at Charterhouse, 3 of which were spent with Richard Crashaw, who also became a poet. On the 5th of May, 1631, Lovelace was sworn in as a gentleman waiter extraordinary to King Charles I, an honorary position for which one paid a fee. He went on to Gloucestershire Hall, Oxford, in 1634. Lovelace attended the University of Oxford and was praised by his contemporary Anthony Wood as the most amiable and beautiful person that ever I beheld, a person also of innate modesty, virtue, and courtly deportment, which made him then, but especially after, when he retired to the great city, much admired and adored by the female sex. While at college he tried to portray himself more as a social connoisseur than as a scholar, continuing his image of being a cavalier. Being a cavalier poet, Lovelace wrote to praise a friend or fellow poet, to give advice in grief or love, to define a relationship, to articulate the precise amount of attention a man owes a woman, to celebrate beauty, and to persuade to love. Lovelace wrote a comedy, The Scholars, while at Oxford. He then left for the University of Cambridge for a few months, where he met Lord Goring, who led him into political trouble. At the age of 18, he was granted the degree of Masters of Arts at Oxford University. Lovelace's poetry was often influenced by his experience with politics and association with important figures of his time. At the age of 19, he contributed a verse to a volume of elegies commemorating Princess Catherine. In 1639, Lovelace joined the regiment of Lord Goring, serving first as a senior ensign and later as a captain in the Bishop's Wars. 1639 to 1640, Bishop's Wars were the first of the conflicts known collectively as the 1639 to 1653 Wars of Three Kingdoms, which took place in Scotland, England and Ireland. I did not know about them. This experience inspired sonnet to General Goring, the poem to Lucasta, Going to the Wars, and the tragedy The Soldier. On his return to his home in Kent in 1640, Lovelace served as a country gentleman and a justice of the peace, encountering civil turmoil over religion and politics. In 1641, Lovelace led a group of men to seize and destroy a petition for the abolition of episcopal rule. I'm not sure what that is. Let's have a look. Of or related to the affairs of a bishop in various Christian churches. Okay. So in 1641, Lovelace led a group of men to seize and destroy a petition for the abolition of episcopal rule, which had been signed by 15,000 people. The following year, he presented the House of Commons with Dering's pro-royalist petition, which was supposed to have been burned. These actions resulted in Lovelace's first imprisonment. He was shortly released on bail, with the stipulation that he avoid communication with the House of Commons without permission. This prevented Lovelace, who had done everything to prove himself during the Bishop's Wars, from participating in the first phase of the English Civil War. This first experience of imprisonment brought him to write one of his best-known lyrics, to Althea, from prison, in which he illustrates his noble and paradoxical nature. Lovelace did everything he could to remain in the king's favour despite his inability to participate in the war. During the political chaos of 1648, he was again imprisoned, this time for nearly a year. When he was released in April 1649, the king had been executed and Lovelace's cause seemed lost. As in his previous incarceration, this experience led to creative production, this time in the cause of spiritual freedom, as reflected in the release of his first volume of poetry, Lucasta. Lovelace died in 1657 and was buried in St. Bride's Church in Fleet Street in the City of London. So that's who he was. Oh dear, died somewhere between 38 and 39, so he wasn't very old. Still, interesting time to have lived. I mean, that may not be a good thing, but it's certainly true. And so the poem we're about to read, To Lucasta, Going to the Wars, was apparently inspired by his participation in the Bishop's Wars. I could look them up in more detail, but I am less convinced that that will be useful to our interpretation of the poetry than just a bit of background on the poet's life, so I shan't do so now at least. So, on to the first reading. To Lucasta going to the wars. Tell me not, sweet, I am unkind, that from the nunnery of thy chaste breast and quiet mind to war and arms I fly. True, a new mistress now I chase, the first foe in the field, and with a stronger faith embrace, a sword, a horse, a shield. Yet this inconstancy is such, as you too shall adore. I could not love thee, dear, so much, loved I not honour more. Interesting. Usually the first thing we would do is look up any words that we don't know, but I don't think there's any words that I'm unsure about. If there's any words that anyone in chat is unsure about, please leave a comment, and we shall look at such words. It's surprising because that reads almost like modern English to me. There's very, very little deviation. I was just wondering when the Canterbury Tales were written for comparison, so that was about 250 years earlier, so that makes sense then. But Shakespeare wasn't much earlier. Shakespeare would have been what? About 50 years earlier, possibly less? Yes, it looks like Shakespeare would have been writing around the turn of the 17th century. Whereas Lovelace would have been writing largely in the early part of the 17th century. So less than 50 years apart. Oh well, this is clearly just a tangent. I just find it interesting that the language is so clear, despite the fact that the poetry itself is almost 400 years old at this point. Anyway. So, no words to look up. I suppose next thing to do is to look at any rhyming and rhythmic structure. So we've got unkind and mind, but nunnery and fly don't rhyme. Chase and embrace and field and shield do. Such and much do, and adore and more do. That makes me wonder if nunnery and fly were actually supposed to rhyme. I very much doubt they would have pronounced it nunnery, so that would suggest that fly would have been pronounced flee. Which is believable, because of course there is the word flee, which I have no doubt has a shared etymology. Perhaps it was originally one word that then split in two, having two of its connotations, having each of two of its connotations take on one of the two possible pronunciations. Still, I'm just speculating. That could be wrong. But what we clearly do have is an AB rhyming scheme. That much is clear. So, rhythmic structure. If you'll give me a second. So we clearly have 8 syllables on every odd numbered line and 6 syllables on every even numbered line. That seems to be the case. I believe it's written in iambic pentameter, not pentameter. I believe it's written in iambs, but it clearly isn't a pentameter because there aren't 5 metrical feet per line. There's alternatingly 4 and 3. So we have tell me not, tell me not sweet, I am unkind. That largely works. Tell me not. That sounds a bit wrenched. Tell me not. Could it be tell me not? That seems more likely, doesn't it? If there was a trichaic substitution at the start. So tell me not sweet, I am unkind. That from the nunnery. That also seems like there's a trichaic substitution at the start. Of thy chaste breast and quiet mind. Of thy chaste breast. How would you normally pronounce that? Of thy chaste breast. Of thy chaste breast. Yeah, I think that's correct. To war and arms I fly. Yep, this looks like iambic. This looks iambic. I'm so used to saying iambic pentameter, I keep trying to say pentameter even when I don't mean it. Yes, so this looks to be iambic, so in other words, you generally have a weak syllable followed by a strong syllable. That is a syllable you place stress on, repeated over and over again. Weak, strong, ta-tum, ta-tum, ta-tum. But there are, as I have very recently learned, certain exceptions where you're allowed to break those rules. Like, for example, at the start of the line, it's not uncommon to reverse a iamb into a trochee, in which case, instead of being a weak followed by a strong, you have a strong followed by a weak. A very good example would be this line, that from the nunnery, which I believe would be strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, strong. So the way to think of it is you actually have the 2 iambs, weak, strong, but the first iamb has been reversed to strong, weak. So that from the nunnery. Point I'm making here is that is completely consistent with iambic poetry, so that's what we seem to be dealing with. The meter is iambic, the rhyming scheme is AB. It is interesting that they're alternating having 4 feet and 3 feet in each line. That's... my knowledge isn't great enough to say whether that is actually a well-known form of poetry or if that is just something that this writer has invented, this poet. Anyway, so that covers any words we don't know. That covers rhyming and rhythmic structure. We haven't really looked at the meaning of this poem. I think it's fairly clear what this poem is talking about. The really interesting thing, though, is the last 2 verses. I could not love thee, dear, so much, loved I not honour more. I mean, the only way that makes sense to me personally, speaking at the moment, is if he's suggesting that honour itself is either demanding that he loves someone more than he does, or that it enables him to love someone more than he otherwise would. But I may be misinterpreting that. There may be some context there I'm just not getting. So, if there's anything about this poem that anyone in chat would like to discuss more, please leave a comment, and I will read it after I have completed the final reading of this poem. So, once more, to Locaster going to the wars. Tell me not, sweet, I am unkind, that from the nunnery of thy chaste breast and quiet mind, to the war and arms I fly. True, a new mistress now I chase, the first foe in the field, and with a stronger faith embrace, a sword, a horse, a shield. Yet this inconstancy is such, as you too shall adore. I could not love thee, dear, so much, loved I not honour more. I suppose another interpretation of this could be that it's they say that absence makes the heart grow stronger, that, you know, when 2 people are separated, they end up wanting to see each other much, or spend time together much more than if they were actually together the entire time. And so I suppose another interpretation is that it's honour that has sent him to war, and it is only because he has gone to war and he is separated from his love that he loves them to such an extent. That's another interpretation that I'm just putting out there. I don't know that that is what the poet intended. Still, I think we have probably done as much as we can with this particular poem. So, unless there's anything anyone in chat would like to discuss, let's move on. Ooh, John Milton. So, John Milton was an English poet and intellectual who served as a civil servant for the Commonwealth of England under its Council of State and later under Oliver Cromwell. He wrote at a time of religious flux and political upheaval, and is best known for his epic poem Paradise Lost, written in blank verse, meaning unrhyming. Paradise Lost is widely considered to be one of the greatest works of literature ever written. Writing in English, Latin, and Italian, he achieved international renown within his lifetime. His celebrated Areopagita Areopagitica. I must be butchering the pronunciation of that, I apologise. Areopagitica, written in condemnation of pre-publication censorship, is among history's most influential and impassionate defences of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. His desire for freedom extended into his style. He introduced new words, coined from Latin and ancient Greek, to the English language, and was the first modern writer to employ unrhymed verse outside of the theatre or translations. William Haley's 1796 biography called him the greatest English author, and he remains generally regarded as one of the preeminent writers in the English language. Though critical reception has oscillated in the centuries since his death, often on account of his republicanism, Samuel Johnson praised Paradise Lost as a poem which, with respect to design, may claim the first place, and with respect to performance, the second, among the productions of the human mind. Though he, a Tory, described Milton's politics as those of an acrimonious and surly Republican, poets such as William Blake, William Wordsworth, and Thomas Hardy revered him. So again, I don't like to read the entirety of these Wikipedia articles, so I'm tempted to start at Civil War prose, tracts and marriage, because that seems like that would have been a particularly influential point in his life. On returning to England, where the Bishops' Wars presaged further armed conflict, Milton began to write prose tracts against episcopacy. Okay, this is interesting. So, as we know from his apparent republicanism and this account of writing prose tracts against episcopacy, he was very much on the other side of the Civil War as the previous poet Richard Lovelace. My memory. Anyway. As I was saying, Milton began to write prose tracts against episcopacy in the service of the Puritan and parliamentarian cause. Milton's first foray into the polemics was of reformation touching church discipline in England, followed by of prelatical episcopacy, the two defences of Smectymnus, a group of Presbyterian divines named from their initials, the TY belonging to Milton's old tutor Thomas Young, and the reason of church government urged against prelaty. He vigorously attacked the High Church party of the Church of England and their leader William Laud, Archbishop of Canterbury, with frequent passages of real eloquence lighting up the rough controversial style of the period, and deploying a wide knowledge of church history. He was supported by his father's investments, but Milton became a private schoolmaster at this time, educating his nephews and other children of the well-to-do. This experience and discussions with educational reformer Samuel Hartlib led him to write his short tract of education in 1644, urging a reform of the national universities. In June 1642, Milton paid a visit to the Mayor House at Forest Hill, Oxfordshire, and, aged 34, married the 17-year-old Mary Powell. I understand that in those days it wasn't uncommon for there to be for that to be typical ages for people to marry. I don't know if it was quite that extreme, but I certainly understand men commonly would marry in their late 20s, whereas women would often get married, as we have seen reading through Pride and Prejudice, even as young as 15 in some cases, though usually a little older. The marriage got off to a poor start as Mary did not adapt to Milton's austere lifestyle or get along with his nephews. Milton found her intellectually unsatisfying and disliked the royalist views she had absorbed from her family. It It is also speculated that she refused to consummate the marriage. Mary soon returned home to her parents and did not come back until 1645, partly because of the outbreak of the Civil War. In the meantime, her desertion prompted Milton to publish a series of pamphlets over the next 3 years arguing for the legality and morality of divorce beyond grounds of adultery. Interesting. That is quite ahead of its time, as I understand it. Anna Beer, one of Milton's most recent biographers, points to a lack of evidence and the dangers of cynicism in urging that it was not necessarily the case that the private life so animated the public polemicizing. In 1643, Milton had a brush with the authorities over these writings in parallel with Hezekiah Woodward, who had more trouble. It was the hostile response accorded to the divorce tracts that spurred Milton to write Areopagitica, a speech of Mr. John Milton for the liberty of unlicensed printing to the Parliament of England, his celebrated attack on pre-printing censorship. In Areopagitica, sorry, I seem to be struggling with this word, and I'm probably mispronouncing it anyway. In Areopagitica, Milton aligns himself with the parliamentary cause, and he also begins to synthesize the ideal of neo-Roman liberty with that of Christian liberty. Milton also courted another woman during this time. We know nothing of her except that her name was Davis, and she turned him down. However, it was enough to induce Mary Powell into returning to him, which she did unexpectedly by begging him to take her back. She bore him 2 daughters in quick succession following their reconciliation. I could go on reading, and I'm sure it would be extremely interesting, but of course we are interested in his poetry, and I like to read some of these articles to give us a sense of who these people were, and I certainly think that's giving us a sense of who John Milton was. So, this poem is entitled On the Morning of Christ's Nativity. So that would be, obviously, the birth of Jesus Christ. Oh, my apologies. Where was I? Right. So, on the morning of Christ's Nativity, this is the month and this is the happy morn, wherein the Son of Heaven's eternal King, of wedded maid and virgin mother born, our great redemption from above did bring. For so the holy sages once did sing, that he our deadly forfeit should release, and with his Father work us a perpetual peace. That glorious form, that light unsufferable, and that far-beaming blaze of majesty, wherewith he wont at heaven's high council table to sit the midst of trinal unity, he laid aside, and here with us to be, forsook the courts of everlasting day, and chose with us a darksome house of mortal clay. Say, heavenly muse, shall not thy sacred vein afford a present to the infant God? Hast thou no verse, no hymn, or solemn strain, to welcome him to this his new abode? Now while the heaven, by the sun's team untrod, have took no print of the approaching light, and all the spangled host keep watch in squadrons bright, see how from far upon the eastern road the starled wizards haste with odours sweet. Oh, run! Prevent them with thy humble ode, and lay it lowly at his blessed feet, and have thou the honour first thy Lord to greet, and join thy voice unto the angel choir, from out his secret altar touched with hallowed fire. Interesting little poem of worship there. So, first things first, were there any words we didn't recognise? If there are any words you didn't recognise, please leave a comment in chat. As for me, I've never heard trinal before, but I mean, I think it's fairly clear that that is referring to Trinity, as in 3 things, as in the Divine Trinity. I don't understand what they mean by Squadrons Bright here, and all the spangled hosts keep watching Squadrons Bright. Or have took no print of the approaching light. But those aren't words I don't recognise, it's more the combination of words that aren't figuring. Unless it's a usage of one or more words that I'm not familiar with. Yes, I don't think there's any words I don't recognise there. So, next thing is rhyming and rhythmic structure. So what do we have? Morn born, king bring, sing, release peace. Ooh, that's an interesting structure. So we have A, B, B, C, C. A, B, C, C. And then after that we have sufferable table, majesty, unity. That's interesting because majesty and unity do not rhyme. Majesty, unity. They almost rhyme, don't they? But C and T aren't quite rhyming. I think they're intended to rhyme though. And then we have B. And then we have day and clay. So again we have A, B, C, C. Vain, strain, God, abode, untrod. Are those all supposed to rhyme? God, untrod. God, abode. His new abode, possibly? Is that how they were pronouncing it? I really don't think God was pronounced goad. Or untrod, so probably. And light and bright, so yet again, A, B, C, C. And we have road, ode, sweet feet, greet, choir, fire. So again, we have a B, C, C rhyming scheme, which isn't one that I remember encountering before. Possibly we have, but I don't recall having encountered that before. Interesting little scheme. If it has a name, I don't know what that is. So, rhythmic structure. That's interesting. The final line, the final verse in the first stanza appears to have 13 syllables. Up till then, it had all been consistent with it. The verses had been consistent with iambic pentameter, with some variations. But I can't resolve I'm not aware of a way to resolve 13 syllables to iambic pentameter. So I'll keep looking. That's interesting. If we look at the first verse of the second stanza, it has 12 syllables. So if we were to naively try and pronounce this as iambic pentameter, we would get that glorious form, that light unsufferable. So 12, which clearly doesn't work, that's wrenched. But if glorious was 2 syllables, which it isn't, then it would actually just about work, I think. So instead of saying glorious, I'll say glorious to make the point. That glorious form, that light unsufferable. That then brings us to 11 syllables, which could be iambic pentameter with a feminine ending. And it does, and that variation would figure with the pronunciation of unsufferable. Although I think, I'm fairly certain in modern English we say insufferable, don't we? Not unsufferable. But either way, I'm just thinking that particular line just makes a lot more sense if they were pronouncing glorious in 2 syllables, not 3. Anyway, I won't go on any further. I think, actually no, I will check one last thing. I will check the number of syllables in the final verse of the second stanza. Is there any world in which this is actually iambic hexameter? This is the month, and this the happy morn. Hold on, I must have done that wrong. This is the month, and this the happy morn. Yes, so that's 5 metrical feet. How do we normally say it? This is the month and the happy morn. Oh, sorry. This is the month and this the happy morn. Happy morn. Happy morn. Happy. I think there's a problem there because we would want to... No, that does work, doesn't it? Because it would be happy morn. Yeah, so that makes sense. It would be strong, weak, strong. It's not happy, it's happy. So, happy morn. Yep, that works. So yeah, I think the first line of the first verse is clearly iambic pentameter, with a trochaic substitution at the beginning of the line. This is the month, and this the happy morn. But then we end up with lines like, and chose with us a darksome house of mortal clay, which is clearly hexameter. Because there's 6 metrical feet, 12 syllables. So, yep. I suppose the conclusion I can come to is that this is beyond me. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but I'm happy to say that in terms of rhyming structure, we have an AB, ABB, CC structure, and in terms of rhythmic structure, there's clearly a tendency towards it being iambic, but it's not a consistent pentameter, and I feel like there's something else going on here that's just going over my head. So that's what I can say on that. We've discussed the any words we don't know. So I guess it's just the meaning of this that's left to be discussed. So I'll read it once more. This is the month, and this the happy morn, wherein the Son of Heaven's eternal King, of wedded maid and virgin mother born, a great redemption from above did bring. For so the holy sages once did sing, that he our deadly forfeit should release, and with his Father work us a perpetual peace. The glorious form, that light unsufferable, and that far-beaming blaze of majesty, wherewith he wont at heaven's high council table to sit the midst of trinal unity, he laid aside, and here with us to be, forsook the courts of everlasting day, and chose with us a darksome house of mortal clay. Say, heavenly Muse, shall not thy sacred vein afford a present to the infant God? Hast thou no verse, no hymn, or solemn strain, to welcome him to this his new abode? Now while the heaven, by the sun's team untrod, have took no print of the approaching light, and all the spangled host keep watch in squadrons bright, see how from far upon the eastern road the star-led wizards haste with odours sweet. O run, prevent them with thy humble ode, and lay it lowly at his blessed feet. Have thou the honour first thy Lord to greet, and join thy voice unto the angel choir, and from out his secret altar touched with hallowed fire? I don't see a way of interpreting that other than it's just a statement of the events described in the Bible. It's possible I'm missing something here. But again, if I am, then it's obviously gone over my head. This line was interesting. Hast thou no verse, no hymn or solemn strain? That's iambic pentameter, isn't it? Hast thou no verse, no hymn or solemn strain? Yep, that's a brilliant example of iambic pentameter. And all the spangled hosts keep watch in squadrons bright. And that's iambic hexameter. So yeah, there's something going on here that I'm not getting. But we covered rhythm already. As for meaning, as I say, it seems to be a statement of the events in the Bible. And join thy voice unto the angel choir, from out his secret altar touched with hallowed fire. Is that urging the reader to worship God? Is that what those two verses are saying? Possibly. Anyway, that's as far as I can interpret the meaning. Goodness me. I was thinking that we would quickly have a look at the next poem by John Milton before we move on, since we've only done 2 poems today. But I rather think... Oh, this is all part of the same thing. We've only read the first little bit. The hymn isn't another poem. It's all part of On the Morning of Christ's Nativity. I do apologise. That being the case, and looking at the time, what I'll do is I'll read the entire thing as part of the final reading, discuss in what ways that changes our interpretation of this poem, and then we'll probably move on. Again, if there's anything you'd like to discuss or have analysed, or anything you're unsure about, just leave a comment in chat and we'll look at it. So I'll move on to the final reading, and this will be the entire poem. This is the month, and this the happy morn, wherein the Son of Heaven's eternal King, of wedded maid and virgin mother born, a great redemption from above did bring. For so the holy sages once did sing, that he our deadly forfeit should release, and with his Father work us a perpetual peace. That glorious form, that light unsufferable, and that far-beaming blaze of majesty, wherewith he wont at heaven's high council table to sit the midst of trinal unity, he laid aside, and here with us to be, forsook the courts of everlasting day, and chose with us a darksome house of mortal clay. Say, heavenly Muse, shall not thy sacred vein afford a present to the infant God? Hast thou no verse, no hymn, or solemn strain, to welcome him to this his new abode? Now while the heaven by the sun's team untrod have took no point of the approaching light, nor the spangled hosts keep watch in squadrons bright, see how from far upon the eastern road the star-led wizards haste with odours sweet. Oh, run, prevent them with thy humble ode, and lay it slowly at his blessed feet. Have thou the honour first thy Lord to greet, and join thy voice unto the angel choir, and from out his secret altar touch with hallowed fire. It was the winter wild, while the heaven-born child, all meanly wrapped in the rude manger lies. Nature in awe to him had doffed her gaudy trim, with her great masters so to sympathize. It was no season then for her to wanton with the sun her lusty paramour. Only with speeches fair she woos the gentle air, to hide her guilty front with innocent snow, and on her naked shame pollute with sinful blame the saintly veil of maiden white to throw, confounded that her Maker's eyes should look so near upon her foul deformities. But he, her fears to cease, sent down the meek-eyed peace. She, crowned with olive green, came softly sliding down through the turning sphere, his ready harbinger, with turtle wing the amorous clouds dividing, and waving wide her myrtle wand, she strikes a universal peace through sea and land. No war or battle sound was heard the world around, the idle spear and shield were high uphung, the hooked chariot stood, unstained with hostile blood, the trumpet spake not to the armed throng, and kings sat still with awful eye, as if they surely knew their sovereign lord was by. But peaceful was the night, wherein the Prince of Light his reign of peace upon the earth began. The winds with wonder whist, smoothly the waters kissed, whispering new joys to the mild ocean, who now hath quite forgot to rave, while birds of calm sit brooding on the charmed wave. The stars with deep amaze stand fixed in the steadfast gaze, bending one way their precious influence, and will not take their flight for all the morning light, or Lucifer often warned them thence, but in their glimmering orbs did glow, until the Lord himself bespake and bid them go. And though the shady gloom had given day her room, the sun himself withheld his wonted speed, and hid his head for shame, as his inferior flame the new enlightened world no more should need. He saw a greater sun appear than his bright throne or burning axle-tree could bear. The shepherd on the lawn, or ere the point of dawn, sat simply chattering in a rustic row. For little thought they then that the mighty Pan was kindly come live with them below. Perhaps their loves or else their sheep was all that did their silly thoughts so busy keep. With such music sweet their hearts and ears did greet, as never was by mortal finger struck. Divinely warbled voice, answering the stringed noise, as all their souls in blissful rapture took. The air such pleasure loft to lose, with thousand echoes still prolongs each heavenly close. Nature that heard such sound, beneath that hollow round of Cynthia's seat, the airy region thrilling, now was almost won. To think her part was done, and that a reign had here its last fulfilling, she knew such harmony alone could hold all heaven and earth in happier union. At last surrounds her sight a globe of circular light, that with long beams of shamefaced night arrayed, the helmed cherubim and sworded seraphim are seen in glittering ranks with their wings displayed, harping in loud and solemn choir, with unexpressive notes to heaven's newborn heir. Such music, as 'tis said, before was never made, but when of old the sons of morning sung, while the Creator great his constellations set, and the well-balanced world on hinges hung, and cast the dark foundations deep, and bid the weltering waves their oozy channel keep. Ring out, ye crystal spheres, once blessed our human ears, if we have power to touch our senses so, and let your silver chime move in melodious time, and let the bass of heaven's deep organ blow, and with your ninefold harmony make up full consort to the angelic symphony. For if such holy song enwrap our fancy long, time will run back and fetch the age of gold, and speckled vanity will sicken soon and die, and leprous sin will melt from earthly mould, and hell itself will pass away, and leave her dolorous mansions to the peering day. Ye truth and justice then will down return to men, orbed in a rainbow and like glories wearing. Mercy will sit between, throned in celestial sheen, with radiant feet the tissued clouds down steering, and heaven, as at some festival, will open wide the gates of her high palace hall. But wisest fate says no, this must not yet be so. The babe lies yet in smiling infancy, that on the bitter cross must redeem our loss, so both himself and us to glorify. Yet first to those chained in sleep, the wakeful trump of doom must thunder through the deep, with such a horrid clang as on Mount Sinai rang, while the red fire and smouldering clouds outbreak. The aged earth, aghast with terror of that blast, shall from the surface to the centre shake, when at the world's last session the dreadful judge in middle air shall spread his throne. And then at last our bliss, full and perfect is, but now begins, for from this happy day the old dragon underground, in straighter limits bound, not half so far cast his usurped sway, and wroth to see his kingdom fail, swings the scaly horror of his folded tail. The oracles are dumb, no voice or hideous hum runs through the arched roof in words deceiving. Apollo from his shrine can no more divine, with hollow shriek the steep of Delphos leaving. No nightly trance or breathed spell inspels the pale-eyed priest from the prophetic cell. The lonely mountains o'er, and the resounding shore, a voice of weeping heard and loud lament, from haunting spring and dale, edged with poplar pale, the parting geniuses with sighting scent, with flower inwoven tresses torn, the nymphs in twilight shade of tangled thickets mourn. In consecrated earth, and on the holy hearth, the Lars and Lemurs moan with midnight plaint. In urns and altars round, a drear and dying sound affrights the flamens at their service quaint, and the chill marble seems to sweat, while each peculiar power forgoes his wonted seat. Peor and Baum forsake their temples dim, with that twice-battered god of Palestine, and mooned Ashtaroth, heaven's queen and mother both, now sits not girt with tapers' holy shrine. The limbic Hammon shrinks his horn, in vain the Tyrian maids their wounded Thammuz mourn, and sullen Moloch fled, have left in shadows dread his burning idol all of blackest hue. In vain with cymbals ring, they call the grisly king in dismal dance about the furnace blue. The brutish gods of Nilus fast, Isis and Horus, and the dog Anubis haste. Nor is Osiris seen in Memphian grove or green, trampling the unshowered grass with lowings load, nor can he be at rest within his sacred chest, nor profoundest hell can be his shroud. In vain with timbrelled anthems dark, the sable-stoled sorcerers bear his worshipped ark. He feels from Judah's land the dreaded infant's hand, the rays of Bethlehem blind his dusky eyne, nor all the gods beside longer dare abide, nor Typhon huge ending in snaky twine, a babe to shrew his godhead true, can in his swaddling fans control the damned crew. How long is this? Goodness me. Oh, there. Okay. So when the sun in bed, curtained with cloudy red, pillows his chin upon an orient wave, the flocking shadows pale droop to the infernal jail, each fettered ghost slips to his several grave, and the yellow-skirted fays fly after the night steeds, leaving their moon-loved maze. But see, the virgin blessed have laid her babe to rest, time's her tedious song should here have ending. Heaven's youngest teamed star have fixed her polished car, her sleeping lord with handmaid lamp attending, and all about the courtly stable bright harnessed angels sit in order serviceable. Oh, goodness me. There is a lot there. I don't think I can even really begin to analyse that. Things I did note was that there was references to at least there were references to Christian, I should probably say theology, but you might also say mythology, to medieval mythology, to Greco-Roman mythology, and to Egyptian mythology. And there may have been other references that I missed. So there was a reference to at least 4 different mythologies throughout that, which Milton apparently assumed the reader would be familiar with. Yep. I'd like to come to a nice neat conclusion, but to be honest, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. I could probably spend a whole stream looking at just that poem. Still, I think that concludes the poetry for this week. And we will move on to Pride and Prejudice. If you do have any questions about the poetry, please leave them. Please leave your comments in chat, and I will look at them shortly. Okay, so, Pride and Prejudice. I will begin as we usually do, by recapping everything that happened in the chapters that we read last week. So, in chapter 47, the Gardners and Elizabeth return to Longbourn as quickly as practically possible and have a long discussion on the coach in which they speculate about the situation. The situation, of course, being that between Lydia and Wickham, who appear to have run off together. The family is reunited and much information is exchanged, including Elizabeth reading the note that Lydia left for Colonel Forster's wife. In chapter 48, Mr. Gardner sets off for London in an effort to assist Mr. Bennet in his search for Lydia. Letters come back from London, regrettably informing the family that no progress has yet been made. Ultimately, the coach brings Mrs. Gardner and her children home to London. Ultimately, the coach that brings Mrs. Gardner and her children home to London also brings Mr. Bennet back home to Longbourn on the return journey without Lydia. Mr. Bennet has lost none of his philosophic composure, saying little, nor has he lost his sense of humour, though he is genuinely grieved. So that's where we got to last week. So, let's continue. Chapter 49. 2 days after Mr. Bennet's return, as Jane and Elizabeth were walking together in the shrubbery behind the house, they saw the housekeeper coming towards them, and concluding that she came to call them to their mother, went forward to meet her. But instead of the expected summons, when they approached her, she said to Miss Bennet, "I beg your pardon, madam, for interrupting you, but I was in hopes you might have got some good news from town, so I took the liberty of coming to ask." "What do you mean, Hill? We have heard nothing from town." Town, of course, meaning London. "Dear madame," cried Mrs. Hill in a great astonishment, "don't you know there is an express come for master from Mr. Gardner? He has been here this half hour, and master has had a letter. Away ran the girls, too eager to get in to have time for speech. Away ran the girls, too eager to get in to have time for speech. They ran through the vestibule into the breakfast room. From thence to the library. Their father was in neither, and they were on the point of seeking him upstairs with their mother when they were met by the butler, who said, "If you are looking for my master, ma'am, he is walking towards the little copse." Upon this information, they instantly passed through the hall once more, and ran across the lawn after their father, who was deliberately pursuing his way towards a small wood on one side of the paddock. Jane, who was not so light nor so much in the habit of running as Elizabeth, soon lagged behind, while her sister, panting for breath, came up with him, and eagerly cried out, "Oh, Papa, what news, what news? Have you heard from my uncle?" "Yes, I've had a letter from him by express." "Well, and what news does it bring, good or bad?" "What is there of good to be expected?" said he, taking a letter from his pocket. "Perhaps you would like to read it." Elizabeth impatiently caught it from his hand. Jane now came up. "Read it aloud," said their father, "for I hardly know myself what it is about." Gracechurch Street, Monday, August 2nd. My dear brother, at last I am able to send you some tidings of my niece, and as such, upon the whole, I hope it will give you satisfaction. Soon after you left me on Saturday, I was fortunate enough to find out in what part of London they were. The particulars I reserve till we meet. It is enough to know that they are discovered. I have seen them both. "Then it is as I always hoped," cried Jane. "They are married." Elizabeth read on. "I have seen them both. They are not married, nor can I find there was any intention of being so. But if you are willing to perform the engagements which I have ventured to make on your side, I hope it will not be long before they are. All that is required of you is to assure to your daughter by settlement her equal share of the £5,000 secured among your children after the decease of yourself and my sister, and moreover to enter into an engagement of allowing her during your life £100 per annum. These are conditions which, considering everything, I had no hesitation in complying with. as far as I thought myself privileged for you. I shall send this by express with no time, I shall send this by express, that no time may be lost in bringing me your answer. You will easily comprehend from these particulars that Mr. Wickham's circumstances are not so hopeless as they are generally believed to be. The world has been deceived in that respect, and I am happy to say there will be some little money, even when all debts are discharged, to settle on my niece, in addition to their own fortune, if, as I conclude will be the case, you send me full powers to act in your name through the whole of this business. I will immediately give directions to Haggerston for preparing a proper settlement. There will not be the smallest occasion for your coming to town again, therefore stay quiet at Longbourn, and depend on my diligence and care. Send back your answer as fast as you can, and be careful to write explicitly. We have judged it best that my niece should be married from this house, of which I hope you will approve. She comes to us today. I shall write again as soon as anything more is determined. Yours, etc., Edward Gardner. So that's a strange letter, isn't it? Admittedly, I don't have the full historical context to judge it by, but the fact that the main thing it seems to be requesting is the assurance of money. I suppose it could be a dowry, but it does seem strange. And the fact that it actually gives very, very little details of anything besides the request. I mean, it states that Mr. Gardner had seen them both, but not much more. Is it possible, cried Elizabeth when she had finished, can it be possible that he will marry her? Wickham is not so undeserving then as we thought him, said her sister. My dear father, I congratulate you. And have you answered the letter, cried Elizabeth? No, but it must be done soon. Most earnestly did she then entreat him to lose no more time before he wrote. Oh, my dear father, she cried, come back and write immediately. Consider how important every moment is in such a case. Let me write for you, said Jane, if you dislike the trouble yourself. I dislike it very much, he replied, but it must be done. And so saying, he turned back with them and walked towards the house. And may I ask, said Elizabeth, but the terms, I suppose, must be complied with. Complied with? I am only ashamed of his asking so little. Interesting. And they must marry, yet he is such a man. Yes, they must marry. There is nothing else to be done. There are two things that I want very much to know. One is, how much money your uncle has laid down to bring it about, and the other, how am I ever to pay him? Money? My uncle, cried Jane. What do you mean, sir? I mean that no man in his senses would marry Lydia on so slight a temptation as 100 a year during my life, and 50 after I'm gone. Oh, okay. No, that does make sense, actually, when you think about the quantities of money they'd been talking about previously. That is very true, said Elizabeth, though it had not occurred to me before. His debts to be discharged and something still remain. Oh, it must be my uncle's doing. Generous good man, I am afraid he has distressed himself. A small sum could not do all this. No, said her father, Wickham's a fool if he takes her with a farthing less than £10,000. I should be sorry to think so ill of him in the very beginning of our relationship. £10,000? Heaven forbid! How is such a sum to be repaid? Mr. Bennet made no answer, and each of them, deep in thought, continued silent till they reached the house. Their father then went on to the library to write, and the girls walked into the breakfast room. And they are really to be married, cried Elizabeth, as soon as they were by themselves. How strange is this, and for this we are to be thankful. That they should marry, small as is their chance of happiness, and wretched as his character, we are forced to rejoice. Oh, Lydia! I comfort myself with thinking, replied Jane, that he certainly would not marry Lydia if he had not a real regard for her. That our kind uncle has done something towards clearing him. I cannot believe that £10,000 or anything like it has been advanced. He has children of his own, and may have more. How could he spend half £10,000? If he were ever able to learn what Wickham's debts had been, said Elizabeth, and how much is settled on his side on our sister, we shall exactly know what Mr. Gardner has done for them, because Wickham has not sixpence of his own. The kindness of my uncle and aunt could never be requited. Their taking her home and affording her their personal protection and continence is such a sacrifice to her advantages years of gratitude cannot enough acknowledge. By this time she is actually with them. If such a goodness does not make her miserable now, she will never deserve to be happy. What a meeting for her, when she first sees my aunt. We must endeavour to forget all that has passed on either side, said Jane. I hope and trust they will yet be happy. His consenting to marry her is proof, I will believe, that he has come to a right way of thinking. Their mutual affection will steady them, and I flatter myself they will settle so quietly and live in so rational a manner as may in time make their past imprudence forgotten. Their conduct has been such, replied Elizabeth, as neither you nor I nor anybody can ever forget. It is useless to talk of it. It now occurred to the girls that their mother was in all likelihood perfectly ignorant of what had happened. They went to the library, therefore, and asked their father whether he would not wish them to make it known to her. He was writing, and, without raising his head, coolly replied, "Just as you please. May we take my uncle's letter to read to her? Take whatever you like, and get away." Elizabeth took the letter from his writing table, and they went upstairs together. Mary and Kitty were both with Mrs. Bennet. One communication would, therefore, do for all. After a slight preparation for good news, the letter was read aloud. Mrs. Bennet could hardly contain herself. As soon as Jane had read Mr. Gardiner's hope of Lydia being soon married, her joy burst forth, and every following sentence added to its exuberance. She was now in an irritation as violent from delight as she had ever been fidgety from alarm and vexation. To know that a daughter would be married was enough. She was disturbed by no fear for her felicity, nor humbled by any remembrance of her misconduct. "My dear, dear Lydia," she cried, "this is delightful indeed. She will be married. I shall see her again. She will be married at 16. My good, kind brother, I knew how it would be. I knew he would manage everything. How I longed to see her, and to see dear Wickham too. But the wedding clothes, I will write to my sister Gardiner about them directly. Lizzie, my dear, run down to your father and ask him how much he will give her. Stay, I will go myself. Ring the bell, Kitty, for Hill. I'll put on my things in a moment, my dear Lydia. How merry we shall be together when we meet." Her eldest daughter endeavoured to give some relief to the violence of these transports by leading her thoughts to the obligations which Mr. Gardiner's behaviour had laid them all under. "For we must attribute this happy conclusion," she added, "in a great measure to his kindness. We are persuaded that he has pledged himself to assist Mr. Wickham with money." "Well," cried her mother, "it is all very right. Who should do it but her own uncle? If he had not had a family of his own, I and my children must have had all his money, you know. And it is the first time we have ever had anything from him, except a few presents. Well, I am so happy. In a short time I shall have a daughter married. Mrs. Wickham, how well it sounds. And she was only 16 last June, my dear Jane. I am in such a flutter that I am sure I can't write, so I'll dictate and you write for me. We will settle with your father about the money afterwards, but things should be ordered immediately." She was then proceeding to all the particulars of calico, muslin, and cambric, and would shortly have dictated some very plentiful orders, had not Jane, though with some difficulty, persuaded her to wait till her father was at leisure to be consulted. One day's delay, she observed, would be of small importance, and her mother was too happy to be quite so obstinate as usual. Other schemes, too, came into her head. "I will go to Meryton," said she, "as soon as I am dressed, and tell the good news to my sister Phillips. As I come back, I can call on Lady Lucas and Mrs. Long. Kitty, run down and order the carriage. An airing would do me a great deal of good, I am sure. Girls, can I do anything for you in Meryton? Oh, here comes Hill. My dear Hill, have you heard the good news? Miss Lydia is going to be married, and you shall all have a bowl of punch to make merry at her wedding." Mrs. Hill began instantly to express her joy. Elizabeth received her congratulations amongst the rest, and then, sick of this folly, took refuge in her own room that she might think with freedom. Poor Lydia's situation must, at best, be bad enough, but that it was no worse, she had need to be thankful. She felt it so, and though in looking forward, neither rational happiness nor worldly prosperity could be justly expected for her sister, in looking back to what they had feared only 2 hours ago, she felt all the advantages of what they had gained. Chapter 50. Mr. Bennet had very often wished before this period of life that, instead of spending his whole income, he had laid by an annual sum for the better provision of his children, and of his wife if she survived. He now wished it more than ever. Had he done his duty in that respect, Lydia need not have been indebted to her uncle for whatever of honour or credit could now be purchased for her. The satisfaction of prevailing on one of the most worthy young men in Great Britain to be her husband might then have rested in its proper place. The satisfaction of prevailing on one of the most worthless young men in Britain to be her husband might then have rested in its proper place. He was seriously concerned that a cause of so little advantage to anyone should be forwarded at the sole expense of his brother-in-law, and he was determined, if possible, to find out the extent of his assistance and to discharge the obligation as soon as he could. When first Mr. Bennet had married, economy was held to be a perfectly useless. When first Mr. Bennet had married, economy was held to be perfectly useless, for, of course, they were to have a son. The son was to join in cutting off the entail as soon as he should be of age, and the widow and younger children would by that means be provided for. 5 daughters successively entered the world, but yet the son was to come, and Mrs. Bennet, for many years after Lydia's birth, had been certain that he would. This event had at last been despaired of, but it was too late to be saving. Mrs. Bennet had no turn for economy, and her husband's love of independence had always prevented their exceeding their income. And her husband's love of independence had alone prevented their exceeding their income. £5,000 was settled by marriage articles on Mrs. Bennet and the children. But in what proportions it should be divided amongst the latter depended on the will of the parents. This was one point, with regard to Lydia at least, which was now to be settled, and Mr. Bennet could have no hesitation in acceding to the proposal before him. In terms of grateful acknowledgment for the kindness of his brother, though expressed most concisely, he then delivered on paper his perfect approbation of all that was done, and his willingness to fulfil the engagements that had been made for him. He had never before supposed that, could Wickham be prevailed on to marry his daughter, it would be done with so little inconvenience to himself as by the present arrangement. He would scarcely be £10 a year the loser by the 100 that was to be paid them. For what with her board and pocket allowance, and the continual presents in money which passed to her through her mother's hands, Lydia's expenses had been very little within that sum. That it would be done with such trifling exertion on his side, too, was another very welcome surprise, for his wish at present was to have as little trouble in the business as possible. When the first transports of rage which had produced his activity in seeking her were over, he naturally returned to all his former indolence. His letter was soon dispatched, for though dilatory in undertaking business, he was quick in its execution. Dilatory. I'm going to look that up, because I assume it doesn't mean diligent, because that wouldn't seem to contrast with being swift in its execution. Intentionally delaying someone or something. His letter was soon dispatched, for although dilatory in undertaking business, he was quick in its execution. Okay. And while we're at it, indolence. Insensibility, lack of pain, laziness, indolent. Okay. He begged to know further particulars of what he was indebted to his brother, but was too angry with Lydia to send any message to her. The good news spread quickly through the house, and with proportionate speed through the neighbourhood. It was borne in the latter with decent philosophy. To be sure, it would have been more for the advantage of conversation had Miss Lydia Bennet come upon the town, or as the happiest alternative, been secluded from the world in some distant farmhouse. But there was much to be talked of in marrying her, and the good-natured wishes for her well-doing which had proceeded before from all the spiteful old ladies in Meryton lost but a little of their spirit in this change of circumstances, because with such a husband her misery was considered certain. It was a fortnight since Mrs. Bennet had been downstairs, but on this happy day she again took her seat at the head of the table, and in spirits oppressively high. No sentiment of shame gave a damp to her triumph. The marriage of her daughter, which had been the first object of her wishes since Jane was 16, now on the point of accomplishment, and her thoughts and her words ran wholly on those attendants of elegant nuptials, fine muslins, new carriages, and servants. She was busily searching through the neighbourhood for a proper situation for her daughter, without knowing or considering what their income might be, rejected many as deficient in size and importance. Hay Park might do, said she, if the Goldings could quit it, or the great house at Stoke if the drawing-room were larger, but Ashworth is too far off. I could not bear to have her 10 miles from me. And as for Pulvis Lodge, the attics are dreadful. Her husband allowed her to talk on without interruption while the servants remained, but when they had withdrawn he said to her, "Mrs. Bennet, before you take any or all of these houses for your son and daughter, let us come to a right understanding. Into one house in this neighbourhood they shall never have admittance. I will not encourage the impudence of either by receiving them at Longbourn." A long dispute followed this declaration, but Mr. Bennet was firm. It soon led to another, and Mrs. Bennet found with amazement and horror that her husband would not advance a guinea to buy clothes for his daughter. He protested that she should receive from him no mark of affection whatever on the occasion. Mrs. Bennet could hardly comprehend it, that his anger could be carried to such a point of inconceivable resentment as to refuse his daughter a privilege without which her marriage would scarcely seem valid, exceeded all she could believe possible. She was more alive to the disgrace which her want of new clothes must reflect on her daughter's nuptials than to any sense of shame at her eloping and living with Wickham a fortnight before they took place. Elizabeth was now most heartily sorry that she had, from the distress of the moment, been led to make Mr. Darcy acquainted with their fears for her sister, for since their marriage would so shortly give the proper termination to the elopement, they might hope to conceal its unfavourable beginning from all those who were not immediately on the spot. She had no fear of its spreading farther through his means. There were few people on whose secrecy she would have more confidently depended, but at the same time there was no one whose knowledge of a sister's frailty would have mortified her so much, not, however, from any fear of disadvantage from it individually to herself, for, at any rate, there seemed a gulf impassable between them. Had Lydia's marriage been concluded on the most honourable terms, it was not to be supposed that Mr. Darcy would connect himself with a family where, to every other objection, would now be added an alliance and relationship of the nearest kind with a man whom he so justly scorned. From such a connection she could not wonder that he would shrink. The wish of procuring her regard, which she had assured herself of his feeling in Derbyshire, could not in rational expectation survive such a blow as this. She was humbled, she was grieved, she repented, though she hardly knew of what. She became jealous of his esteem, when she could no longer hope to be benefited by it. She wanted to hear of him. When there seemed the least chance of gaining intelligence, she was convinced that she could have been happy with him, when it was no longer likely they should meet. With a triumph for him, as she often thought, could he know that the proposals which he had proudly spurned only 4 months ago would now have been most gladly and gratefully received. He was as generous, doubted not, as the most generous of his sex, but while he was mortal there must be a triumph. I'm not sure I follow that final line. He was as generous, she doubted not, as the most generous of his sex, but while he was mortal there must be a triumph. I'm not sure. Anyway, she began now to comprehend that he was exactly the man who, in disposition and talents, would most suit her. His understanding and temper, though unlike her own, would have answered all her wishes. It was an union that must have been to the advantage of both. By her ease and liveliness, his mind might have been softened, his manner improved, and from his judgment, information, and knowledge of the world, she must have received benefit of greater importance. But no such happy marriage could now teach the admiring multitude what connubial felicity really was. An union of a different tendency, and precluding the possibility of the other, was soon to be formed in their family. How Wickham and Lydia were to be supported in tolerable independence she could not imagine, but how little of permanent happiness could belong to a couple who were only brought together because their passions were stronger than their virtue, she could easily conjecture. Mr. Gardiner soon wrote again to his brother. To Mr. Bennet's acknowledgments he briefly replied, and with assurance of his eagerness to promote the welfare of any of his family, and concluded with entreaties that the subject might never be mentioned to him again. The principal purport of his letter was to inform them that Mr. Wickham had resolved on quitting the militia. It was greatly my wish that he should do so, he added, as soon as his marriage was fixed on, and I think you will agree with me in considering the removal from the course as highly advisable, both on his account and my niece's. It is Mr. Wickham's intention to go into the regulars. I'm not sure what the regulars is as opposed to the militia, and among his former friends there are still some who are able and willing to assist him in the army. Surely they don't mean that he's giving up his officership and becoming a normal soldier, because that just wouldn't be the proper place for a gentleman. He has the promise of a ensigncy in General Dash's regiment. An ensign's the lowest rank of officer, I think. Yes, it's a junior rank of a commissioned officer in the armed forces of some countries, normally in the infantry or navy. It doesn't specifically say the lowest rank. At least in modern militaries there are lower ranks, but it's a very low rank. So he would still be an officer. So I'm not sure what the distinction between the militia and the regulars is. Perhaps the militia is the equivalent of today's what are they called? The reserves? Is that the proper term? Yes, the military reserves. Perhaps the militia is the equivalent of the military reserves in that they have to be trained and prepared for service, but they aren't normally, under normal circumstances, they aren't actually serving in a military capacity, so they're there as a backup in case they are needed. Or perhaps it's something different entirely, I don't know. He has the promise of an ensigncy in General Dash's regiment, now quartered in the north. It is an advantage to have it so far from this part of the kingdom. It promises fairly, and I hope among different people, where they may each have a character to preserve. They will both be more prudent. I've written to Colonel Forster to inform him of our present arrangements and to request that he will satisfy the various creditors of Mr. Wickham in and near Brighton with assurances of speedy payment, for which I have pledged myself. And will you give yourself the trouble of carrying similar assurances to his creditors in Meryton, of whom I shall subjoin a list according to his information? He has given in all his debts. I hope at least he has not deceived us. Haggerston has our directions, and all will be completed in a week. They will then join his regiment, unless they are first invited to Longbourn. And I understand from Mrs. Gardiner that my niece is very desirous of seeing you all before she leaves for the south. She is well and begs to be dutifully remembered to you and her mother. Yours, etc., E. Gardiner. Mr. Bennet and his daughter saw all the advantages of Wickham's removal from the shire as clearly as Mr. Gardiner could do, but Mrs. Bennet was not so well pleased with it. Lydia's being settled in the north just when she had expected most pleasure and pride in her company, for she had by no means given up her plan of their residing in Hertfordshire, was a severe disappointment, and besides it was such a pity that Lydia should be taken from a regiment where she was acquainted with everybody and had so many favourites. She is so fond of Mrs. Forster, said she, it would be quite shocking to send her away, and there are several of the young men too that she likes very much. The officers may not be so pleased in General Dash's regiment. His daughter's request, for such it might be considered, of being admitted into her family again before she set off to the north, received at first an absolute negative, but Jane and Elizabeth, who agreed in wishing, for the sake of their sister's feelings and consequence, that she should be noticed on her marriage by her parents, urged him, so earnestly, yet so rationally and so mildly, to receive her and her husband at Longbourn, as soon as they were married, that it was prevailed on to think as they thought, and act as they wished, and their mother had the satisfaction of knowing that she would be able to show her married daughter in the neighbourhood before she was banished to the north. When Mr. Bennet wrote again to his brother, therefore he sent his permission for them to come, and it was settled, and as soon as the ceremony was over they should proceed to Longbourn. Elizabeth was surprised, however, that Wickham should consent to such a scheme, and had she consulted only her own inclination, any meeting with him would have been the last object of her wishes. Chapter 51. Their sister's wedding day arrived, and Jane and Elizabeth felt for her probably more than she felt for herself. The carriage was sent to meet them at and they were to return in it by dinner time. Their arrival was dreaded by the elder Miss Bennet, and Jane more especially, who gave Lydia the feeling which would have attended herself had she been the culprit. Who gave Lydia the feelings which would have been attended herself had she been the culprit, and was wretched in the thought of what her sister must endure. Hold on, let me say that again. Their arrival was dreaded by the elder Miss Bennet, and Jane more especially, who gave Lydia the feelings which would have attended herself had she been the culprit, and was wretched in the thought of what her sister must endure. Oh, I understand. Jane is imagining Lydia as experiencing the same emotions that she herself would have felt had she been the culprit. That makes sense. They came. The family were assembled in their breakfast room to receive them. Smiles decked the face of Mrs. Bennet as the carriage drove up to the door. Her husband looked impenetrably grave, her daughters alarmed, anxious, uneasy. Lydia's voice was heard in the vestibule. The door was thrown open, and she ran into the room. Her mother stepped forward, embraced her, and welcomed her with rapture, gave her hand with an affectionate smile to Wickham, who followed his lady, and wished them both joy with an alacrity which shrewd no doubt of their happiness. Shewed. Oh, it's an archaic spelling of show. That makes sense. Alacrity. Eagerness, liveliness, enthusiasm. The reception from Mr. Bennet, to whom they then turned, was not quite so cordial. His countenance rather gained in austerity, and he scarcely opened his lips. The easy assurance of the young couple, indeed, was enough to provoke him. Elizabeth was disgusted, and even Miss Bennet was shocked. Miss Bennet, of course, being Jane. Lydia was Lydia still, untamed, unabashed, wild, noisy, and fearless. She turned from sister to sister, demanding their congratulations. When at length they all sat down, looked eagerly round the room, took notice of some little alteration in it, and observed with a laugh that it was a great while since she had been there. Wickham was not at all more distressed than herself, but his manners were always so pleasing, that had his character and his marriage been exactly what they ought, his smiles and his easy address, while he claimed their relationship, would have delighted them all. Elizabeth had not before believed him quite equal to such assurance, but she sat down, resolving within herself to draw no limits in future to the impudence of an impudent man. She blushed, and Jane blushed, but the cheeks of the two who caused their confusion suffered no variation of colour. There was no want of discourse. The bride and her mother could neither of them talk fast enough, and Wickham, who happened to sit near Elizabeth, began inquiring about his acquaintance in the neighbourhood with a good-humoured ease which she felt very unable to equal in her replies. They seemed each of them to have the happiest memories in the world. Nothing of the past was recollected with pain, and Lydia led voluntarily to subjects which her sisters would not have alluded to for the world. Only think of its being 3 months, she cried, since I went away. It seems but a fortnight, I declare, and yet there have been things enough happened in the time. Good gracious, when I went away, I am sure I had no more idea of being married till I came back again, though I thought it would be very good fun if it was. Her father lifted up his eyes. Jane was distressed. Elizabeth looked expressively at Lydia, but she, who never heard nor saw anything of which she chose to be insensible, gaily continued, "Oh, mamma, do the people hereabouts know I am married today? I was afraid they might not, and we overtook William Golding in his curricle, so I was determined he should know it, and so I let down the side glass next to him and took off my glove and let my hand just rest upon the window frame so that he might see the ring, and then I bowed and smiled like anything." Elizabeth could bear it no longer. She got up and ran out of the room, and returned no more. She heard them passing through the hall to the dining parlour. She then joined them soon enough to see Lydia, with anxious parade, walk up to her mother's right hand, and hear her say to her elder sister, "Ah, Jane, I take your place now, and you must go lower, because I am a married woman." It was not to be supposed that time would give Lydia that embarrassment from which she had been so It was not to be supposed that time would give Lydia that embarrassment from which she had been so wholly free at first. Her ease and good spirits increased. She longed to see Mrs. Phillips, the Lucases, and all their other neighbours, and to hear herself called Mrs. Wickham by each of them, and in the meantime she went after dinner to show her ring and boast of being married to Mrs. Hill and the two housemaids. "Well, mamma," said she, when they were all returned to the breakfast room, "and what do you think of my husband? Is not he a charming man? I'm sure my sisters must all envy me. I only hope they may have my good luck. I only hope they may have half my good luck. They must all go to Brighton. That is the place to get husbands. What a pity it is, mamma, we did not all go." "Very true, and if I had my will, we should. But, my dear Lydia, I don't at all like your going such a way off. Must it be so?" "Oh, Lord, yes. There is nothing in that. I shall like it of all things. You and Papa and my sisters must come down and see us. We shall be at Newcastle all the winter, and I dare say there will be some balls. I'll take care to get good partners for them all." "I should like it beyond anything," said her mother. "And then when you go away you must leave one or two of my sisters behind you, and I dare say I shall get husbands for them before the winter is over." "I thank you for my share of the favour," said Elizabeth, "but I do not particularly like your way of getting husbands." Their visitors were not to remain above 10 days with them. Mr. Wickham received his commission before he left London, and is to join his regiment at the end of a fortnight. No one but Mrs. Bennet regretted that their stay would be so short, and she made the most of the time by visiting about with her daughter and having very frequent parties at home. These parties were acceptable to all. To avoid a family circle was even more desirable to such as did think than such as did not. Let me say that again. These parties were acceptable to all. To avoid a family circle was even more desirable to such as did think than such as did not. Oh, I see. So these parties were more desirable to those that thought, in other words, those that recognised the impropriety in what had taken place and were upset by it, than those that did not. Wickham's affection for Lydia was just what Lizzie had expected to find, not equal to Lydia's for him. She had scarcely needed her present observation to be satisfied, from the reason of things that their elopement had been brought on by the strength of her love rather than by his, and she would have wondered why, without violently caring for her, he chose to elope with her at all, had she not felt certain that his flight was rendered necessary by the distress of circumstances, and if that were the case, he was not the young man to resist an opportunity of having a companion. So I think the conjecture there is that perhaps Wickham felt like he had to leave for other reasons, and because Lydia cared for him so much, she insisted on going with him, and he wasn't up to the task of refusing such a companion. I think that's what that's saying. Lydia was exceedingly fond of him. He was her dear Wickham on every occasion. No one was to be put in competition with him. He did everything best in the world, and she was sure he would kill more birds on the 1st of September than anybody else in the country. Don't know what that's a reference to. One morning, soon after their arrival, as she was sitting with her two elder sisters, she said to Elizabeth, "Lizzie, I never gave you an account of my wedding, I believe. You were not by when I told Mamma and the others all about it. Are you not curious to hear how it was managed?" "No, really," replied Elizabeth. "I think there cannot be too little said on the subject." "La, you are so strange. But I must tell you how it went off. We were married, you know, at St. Clement's, because Wickham's lodgings were in that parish, and it was settled that we should all be there by 11 o'clock. My uncle and aunt and I were to go together, and the others were to meet us at the church. Well, Monday morning came, and I was in such a fuss. I was so afraid, you know, that something would happen to put it off, and then I should have gone quite distracted. And there was my aunt. All the time I was dressing, preaching, and talking away just as if she was reading a sermon." and there was my aunt all the time I was dressing, preaching and talking away just as if she was reading a sermon. However, I did not hear above one word in 10, for I was thinking, you may suppose, of my dear Wickham. I longed to know whether he would be married in his blue coat. Well, and so we breakfasted at 10 as usual. I thought it would never be over, for by the by, you are to understand that my uncle and aunt were horrid unpleasant all the time I was with them. If you'll believe me, I did not once put my foot out of doors, though I was there a fortnight, not one party or scheme or anything. To be sure, London was rather thin, but however the little theatre was open. Well, and so just as the carriage came to the door, my uncle was called away upon business to that horrid man, Mr. Stone, and then, you know, when once they get together, there is no end of it. Well, I was so frightened I did not know what to do, for my uncle was to give me away, and if we were beyond the hour, we could not be married all day. But luckily he came back in 10 minutes' time, and then we all set out. However, I recollected afterwards that if he had been prevented going, the wedding need not be put off, for Mr. Darcy might have done as well. Mr. Darcy, repeated Elizabeth in utter amazement. Oh, yes. He was to come there with Wickham, you know. But gracious me, I quite forgot. I ought not to have said a word about it. I promised him so faithfully. What will Wickham say? It was to be such a secret. If it was to be a secret, said Jane, say not another word on the subject. You may depend upon my seeking no further. Oh, certainly, said Elizabeth, though burning with curiosity. We will ask you no questions. Thank you, said Lydia, for if you did, I should certainly tell you all, and then Wickham would be angry. Of such encouragement to ask, Elizabeth was forced to put it out of her power by running away. But to live in ignorance of such a point was impossible, or at least it was impossible not to try for information. Mr. Darcy had been at a sister's wedding. It was exactly a scene, and exactly among people, where he had apparently least to do, and least temptation to go. Conjectures as to the meaning of it, rapid and wild, hurried into her brain, but she was satisfied with none. Those that best pleased her, as placing his conduct in the noblest light, seemed most improbable. She could not bear such suspense, and hastily seizing a sheet of paper, wrote a short letter to her aunt to request an explanation of what Lydia had dropped, if it were compatible with the secrecy which had been intended. You may readily comprehend, she added, that my curiosity must be to know how a person unconnected with any of us, and comparatively speaking a stranger to our family, should have been amongst you at such a time. Pray write instantly, and let me understand it, unless it is, for very cogent reasons, to remain in the secrecy which Lydia seems to think necessary, and then I must endeavour to be satisfied with ignorance. Not that I shall, though, she added to herself as she finished the letter. And my dear aunt, if you do not tell me in an honourable manner, I shall certainly be reduced to tricks and stratagems to find it out. Jane's delicate sense of honour would not allow her to speak to Elizabeth privately of what Lydia had let fall. Elizabeth was glad of it, till it appeared whether her enquiries would receive any satisfaction. She had rather be without a confidant. So, things are getting very interesting again. Seems Mr. Darcy may have had something to do with this wedding as well. Anyway, that concludes the Pride and Prejudice this week. So we'll move on to the riddles. Now, last week I believe we finished on 81. No legs, no arms, no wings have I, yet through the air I swiftly fly. I cannot boast a graceful form, and dress less elegant than warm. I own the soft poetic line, and sweet love tales are often mine. I'm shallow oft, and oft profound, heavy and dull and frequent found, yet oft with wit and sense abound. Of Europe I have made the tour, and often visit Asia's shore. I in America have been, and Africa my form has seen. The prince, the peddler, mistress, maid, derive advantage from my aid. Forms ages since, yet made today, I'm hourly subject to decay. When winds blow hard and showers fall, exposed I patiently bear all, yet all my sufferings hence so great, they always expedite my fate. To Father Time and Mother Earth, I'm indebted for my birth, and when my father's mandates come, that I shall meet the general doom, I quietly to fate resigned, am to my mother's arms consigned, and from our union often springs what wealth and fame to Albion brings. I must admit, I've forgotten the precise answer to this, but I believe it was in essence a tree. I believe I guessed an oak tree, and that was wrong. I think it may have been something more general, like just a tree or just a tree trunk or something like that. Let's see. A trunk. Which I can only assume means a tree trunk. So that was the one that we finished off with last week. So, 82. My original birth is derived from the earth, but my form is constructed by man. The return of each day sees my birth and decay, my limits are marked by a span. No existence I have, yet life I can save, I'm compared to the pilgrim's support. Not long found at home, with companions I roam to places of pleasant resort. I keep early hours, for the superior powers think my rising determines my worth. But may be that thought from Gallia was brought, whence most date my ancestors' birth. My virtue is proved to those by whom loved, in passing a fiery ordeal. If I don't stand the test, I'm never caressed, if I do, then my value's deemed real. Universally sought, though not worth a groat, the taste of all parties I please, yet my plural makes clear what strange will appear. The wise miss blockheads win me with ease. When to you I am known, you'll certainly own that learned oft seek me in vain, while each knave, fool, or clown that disgraces the town may always my service obtain. Jenny says, sounds like an artwork made by natural resources. I find the lines, the return of each day sees my birth and decay, my limits are marked by a span, and I keep early hours for the superior powers think my rising determines my worth, and while each knave, fool, or clown that disgraces the town may always my service obtain. I think those lines, to me, suggest otherwise. Jenny says, would you please not scroll that fast? Thank you. Are you trying to reread it? I can read it again if you like. My original birth is derived from the earth, but my form is constructed by man. The return of each day sees my birth and decay, my limits are marked by a span. No existence I have, yet life I can save, I'm compared to the pilgrim's support. Not long found at home, with companions I roam to places of pleasant resort. I keep early hours, for the superior powers think my rising determines my worth. But maybe that thought from Gallia was brought, whence most date my ancestors' birth. My virtue is proved to those by whom love, in passing a fiery ordeal. If I don't stand the test, I'm never caressed. If I do, then my value's deemed real. Universally sought, though not worth a groat, the taste of all parties I please. Yet my plural makes clear what strange will appear. The wise Miss Blockhead win with me with ease. When to you I am known, you'll certainly own the learned oft seek me in vain, while each knave, fool, or clown that disgraces the town may always my service obtain. I don't think I can zoom out to show quite all of it without it being far too small to read. That's about the best I can do. Because of the word taste, I guess it's a food item? My original birth is derived from the earth, but my form is constructed by man. That on its own might suggest something made of clay, perhaps? The return of each day sees my birth and decay, my limits are marked by a span. I mean, you could also make the argument that it could be a stone sundial? Jenny says, but clay doesn't taste anything. You're referring to universally taught, though not worth a groat, the taste of all parties I please. See, I don't think the taste of all parties I please actually is referring to literal taste. But I can't quite place what it does mean. Like, for example, we have the expression a taste of defeat, which doesn't refer to actually tasting anything, it refers to experiencing a small amount of defeat or something which resembles defeat. It's about having an experience, not the literal taste. Which is why I think the taste of all parties I please isn't actually referring to taste, but I'm not quite sure what it is saying. Yet my plural makes clear what strange will appear. The wise miss blockades with me, win me with ease. I'm gonna have to give up on this one, I think. I can't seem to solve it. If anyone in chat would like to make a guess, please leave a comment. I really don't know. A roll? A roll of what? As in, a bread roll? My original birth is derived from the earth. I suppose flour comes from wheat. But my form is constructed by man. The return of each day since my birth and decay, my limits are marked by a span. Because people would bake bread on the same day they eat it, I assume. Or rather, the bakers would bake the bread and people would eat it the same day. No existence I have, yet life I can save. I'm compared to the pilgrim's support. I guess that makes sense with bread. But I'm not sure what they mean by no existence I have, unless they don't mean existence rather than life. Not long found at home, with companions I roam to places of pleasant resort. Okay, I keep early hours, for the superior powers think my rising determines my worth. Rising, as in bread rising. But maybe that thought from Gaulia was brought, whence most date my ancestors' birth. Wouldn't know about that. My virtues prove to those by whom loved, in passing a fiery ordeal, in the oven. If I don't stand the test, I'm never caressed. If I do, then my values deemed real. Universally sought, though not worth a groat. The taste of all parties I please. Okay, maybe it does refer to actual taste. Yet my plural makes clear, rolls. What strange will appear, the wise miss blockades win me with ease. Don't follow. When to you I am known, you'll certainly own. The learned doth seek me in vain. Roll? With each knave, fool, or clown that disgraces a town, may always my service obtain. Because food is thrown at them, perhaps? I don't fully understand that paragraph either. Oh well. The solution is roll, apparently. 83. In Moses' time there lived one, as scripture will declare, who spoke and ever spoke the truth, which plainly will appear. He lived on earth and did not sin, guiltless he lived and died, and all his actions were most just and to be justified. Yet for all this, 'tis sure in heaven, he never shall find a place, nor any of his ancestors, nor yet his future race. In Moses' time there lived one, as scripture will declare, who spoke and ever spoke the truth, which plainly will appear. He lived on earth, so he was alive, and did not sin, guiltless he lived and died, and all his actions were most just and to be justified. Yet for all this, 'tis sure in heaven, he never shall find a place, nor any of his ancestors, nor yet his future race. Could this be a reference to an ancient Greek? I don't think that would have been quite contemporaneous with Moses. Not that there weren't people in ancient Greece at the time, but like the height of ancient Greek philosophy and all that was after Moses, I believe. But that's the only thing I can think of, because then they would have been denied access to heaven because they were pagans, not because they weren't sinful. Ah, but it does say it will be denied to all his future race. So that doesn't figure. I mean, the other option is to go with something like an animal. But how would you have an animal that... Ooh! Is there an animal in scripture that was about during Moses' time that could speak? Could that be the solution? Was there like a particular talking animal? I don't think so, but I don't know so. Jenny said, did not sin. Jesus? Well, that was a lot after Moses' time. And certainly his future race you would think would be going to heaven. But you do make a point in so much as there are relatively few figures in the Bible that I believe are considered to be without sin. Jesus being the only one I'm confident of. Possibly the Virgin Mary, I'm not sure. He said, but Jesus is the only sinless person according to the Bible. That's why I was wondering if it could be an animal. Because if it was an animal, then of course their ancestors and future race wouldn't be going to heaven. And I don't think there's anything in the Bible that, strictly speaking, says that an animal can't live without sin. Although, equally, you could argue, can an animal even sin? But that's what I was thinking. If there was like a story in the Bible that happened around the time of Moses in which there was a talking animal, that would figure. But I can't think of one. I think I'm going to have to look this one up as well, unfortunately. And we'll try one more riddle after this. Balaam's ass. Was this a talking donkey? Here we go. After Balaam, this is from Wikipedia, after Balaam starts punishing the donkey, hold on, if it's on Wikipedia then I should put it in the browser window here so everyone can see. At first the angel is seen only by the donkey Balaam is riding, which tries to avoid the angel. After Balaam starts punishing the donkey for refusing to move, it is miraculously given the power to speak to Balaam, and it complains about Balaam's treatment. At this point, Balaam is allowed to see the angel, who informs him that the donkey's turning away from the messenger is the only reason the angel did not kill Balaam. Balaam immediately repents, but is told to go on. So, yep, it was a talking donkey. So, I was on the right lines. I was about as correct as I could have been without knowing the story. So, we will finish on 84, I suppose. Over all the world my empire I extend, and while that lasts, my reign can never end. I flatter all and almost all deceive, yet when I promise next, they still believe. To heaven I lead, but must not enter there. In hell I cannot be, earth is my sphere. If still in vain you puzzle for my name, search your own breast, for sure I surely am. For there I surely am. Over all the world my empire I extend, and while that lasts my reign can never end. I flatter all and almost all deceive, and yet when I promise next they still believe. To heaven I lead, but must not enter there. In hell I cannot be, earth is my sphere. If still in vain you puzzle for my name, search your own breast, for there I surely am. The only thing I can think of is perhaps the heart? Because I flatter all and almost all deceive, that figures, and yet when I promise next they still believe. That also makes sense. To heaven I lead, but must not enter there. Technically, yes, because your body doesn't go to heaven. In hell I cannot be, earth is my sphere. Again, yes. If still in vain you puzzle for my name, search your own breast, for there I surely am. That all figures, but over all the world my empire I extend, and while that lasts my reign can never end. That doesn't. Well, that's my best guess. The heart. Hope. Over all the world my empire I extend, and while that lasts my reign can never end. I flatter all and almost all deceive, and yet when I promise next I still believe. To heaven I lead, but must not enter there. In hell I cannot be, earth is my sphere. Ooh, that's quite clever. If still in vain you puzzle for my name, search your own breast, for there I surely am. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I wouldn't have got that, but that makes sense. So, that concludes the stream for this week. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'll be streaming again on Friday, in which I'll be continuing with Mist. Saturday, I will probably be streaming as well. I don't know how long Mist actually is, so it's quite possible I'll be doing more Mist then as well. Monday again, I'll be streaming, and again, it will be some sort of video game. Don't know how long Mist is, so don't know if I'll still be doing it by that point. And then next Wednesday, we're back round to poetry, prose, and riddles. So, I think we'll raid Ohei Ohina. So, once again, thank you for coming. And I hope you have a wonderful night. Good night.